Okay, we're going to be at ease for just another couple of minutes. We do need to establish a quorum here. With me being here, we do technically have a quorum. However, our rules state that the chairman votes only in the event of a tie. So I'm going to give just a few minutes to get another member or two here for the committee. If y'all give us just a moment. Okay, we just had another member come in, so we're going to begin the meeting now. We do have a quorum established. I'd like to start off, this is the House Governmental Affairs Full Committee. I'd like to start off asking Chairman Lumsden if he would lead us in prayer.
If you would bow with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your love and your goodness to us and for watching over us and caring for us. We thank you for the opportunity that you give to us to be here to represent our districts and deal with the business of this before us with the state of Georgia. We ask for your wisdom, for your guidance and your direction in all that we do. May it be pleasing unto you and beneficial for the people of our state. For we pray it in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen.
Okay, we're going to start out with House Bill 414, Chairman Todd Jones, and I think Director Amati is going to join him at the table. So, Chairman Jones, if you would go ahead and proceed. I believe you're bringing to us a substitute.
Yes. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'm bringing LC 473421S, and Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much for the time. Thank you. Before I proceed, I don't believe he needs an introduction, but to my left, your right, is Executive Director David Amati of the Georgia Ethics Commission. I've asked him to join me just in case there are any subject matter questions that frankly are a little bit outside of my depth, and he'd be able to provide to the full committee any type of, I guess, specific examples. Members of the committee, the subcommittee, I thought did a very good job vetting this and asking me questions, and I kind of changed my introduction on this bill because of the subcommittee's questions. The intent of this bill was effectively to ensure that there is a level playing field for all, I'm going to call it, actors within our elections. And what I mean by that is this. What we have found is because as we've seen the internet proliferate, as we've seen people basically serving within our elections, meaning as consultants, mail houses, social media consultants, you name it, individuals outside of our state are not, I'll say, at reach by the Georgia Ethics Commission, and that was a surprise to me. In other words, Mr. Amati and his team's subpoenas end at the state line. So imagine you're basically in an election, your opponent is doing X, Y, or Z, but their consultant, their social media house, their mail house, you name it, is outside of our state. They are not necessarily, they are subject to, but the reach of the Georgia Ethics Commission today does not really allow him effectively, without perfecting his subpoena through the AG of another state, to be able to reach those potential bad actors for any type of investigation. So what the bill does, very simply, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go through it. Okay, thank you. Is first and foremost in line 15 through 17, it defines what a non-resident is. Now, I have the OCG code 91090 if you'd like me to read the entire thing, and I'm sure Mr. Morelli has it at his fingertips, but essentially what it means is the... Okay. So, Sorry, I thought he was having potentially a coronary. What it basically means is an individual outside of our state who effectively has a nexus into our state because of business, in this case, elections business, they are now subject to this code section if this bill becomes statute. Section 2 is broken up into two parts, lines 21 through 26 and lines 27 through 33. Basically, lines 21 through 26 are effectively affecting what the Georgia Ethics Commission can do in terms of its powers and what it is required to do in terms of its investigations and ensuring that all of us play on a level playing field. Lines 27 through 33 is how Mr. Amati and his team, if that non-resident does not, I'll say, abide by the request of the commission, and let's, for example, take someone in South Carolina, doesn't abide by the request by the commission, Mr. Amati can go to the Superior Court. That means there's going to be due process. The Superior Court will ensure that all processes are followed, and you will see in lines 32 and 33, pertinent or necessary to further the investigation or enforcement action authorized by this chapter. So in other words, Mr. Amati and the commission cannot just go on a fishing expedition, but rather the judge would have to say, yes, this is necessary and pertinent for the investigation to ensure that there was in fact a fair election, or there was possibly dark money used, there's possibly something illegal done, something against the Ethics Commission rules that we go under every day and all the time when we run for office. Finally, Section 3 is very simple. Based on the fact that they're a non-resident, we had a defined venue. So if there was going to be an action taken, that action would be taken here in Fulton County, Georgia. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that is the bill, and I stand ready for questions, and I believe Mr. Amati does also.
Okay, before we get into questions, just a question from me. I do know the reason this is a sub is there was a minor wording change, I think, that needed to be made. Can you point that out from the original version?
I apologize, yes. If I could direct you to line 16, second from the last, where it says, or transacts business within. It used to say with. Mr. Amati and I would like to direct that blame to Mr. Morelli. I'm just kidding. No, but in all seriousness, all three of us missed it on the original, and then we realized it, and we needed to fix it with the sub.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We have just a few questions here. Representative Adesanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for presenting, and good to see you, David. Hey, so I have a quick question. If a consultant is based out of, say, North Carolina, or maybe no, South Carolina, and they, worked on an election here in Georgia, and they don't know they've violated something, would this law applies to them?
Yeah, I mean, there's no mens rea to our election laws. If someone doesn't abide by them, they're in violation, whether they're in state or out of state. This doesn't change that fact. This just changes our ability to obtain the evidence of, usually what we're talking about is a dark money organization that doesn't register, doesn't disclose where the money's coming from, how they're spending it. This gives us a mechanism to obtain that evidence if it's out of state from that vendor.
Thank you. And the reason why I ask, we found a lot of consultants work with so many states, and they're not really digging into the applicable laws. They just, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So this is I'm glad you brought that. This is a good point. It wouldn't necessarily be that the Ethics Commission in this hypothetical would say the consultant broke the law. What we would be saying is the consultant has the evidence that we can prove the law was broken, and who the case would be against would be who's funding it. Now, in some cases, the consultant is aware and involved in that. In some cases, they're not. But right now, if a group wants to spend unregulated money to run against you in a primary, and they're not disclosing, not registering, they are incentivized to go across state lines, use a vendor who we can't get to then prove that they funded this illegal operation. But it's not necessarily that the vendor or consultant would per se be in violation of the law.
Necessarily.
Exactly.
It's just their source of evidence.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, could I say one additional thing
Yes,
to the
please.
member's question? I want to be clear. We're not expanding the commission's authority. What we're doing here is giving them the ability to perfect the ability to get the information they need in order to determine if, for instance, dark money was used or any violation of our ethics laws. Okay.
Representative Bernal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that you said the appeal will go to the Superior Court, and due to the fact that most of our courts are backed up, is this an issue that would need to be resolved immediately, or just whenever it comes up on the docket?
Well, I don't know.
No, please, you go now.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that, it kind of depends on where we are. You know, if it's in the middle of an election, we would ask for some sort of expedited hearing. If it comes up, you know, maybe after the election in the course of an investigation, we're not going to try and, you know, skip the line necessarily. It just sort of depends on the case.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could add something, Representative Bernal, this isn't an appeal that is being made. This is basically, and I'll use the representative's example, a North Carolina consultant did not abide by the requests from the commission for, I'm making something up right now, invoices for last year's primary. Now, the commission can go to the Superior Court and perfect that request so that request can be served in North Carolina, and we expect a North Carolina judge to say, well, if a Superior Court judge in Georgia says good in terms of due process, in terms of, you know, reasonable, you know, et cetera, then let's go ahead and perfect that, and we'll go ahead and serve that on the North Carolina resident.
Can I say
Oh, please.
And I want to be clear, because I don't want it to seem like we're just the heavy hand at all times, right? We've drafted it in this way so that we don't necessarily have to go to court, right? We're given the opportunity. And I'll say this, we've dealt with a lot of consultants who are willing to cooperate. The judicial process is just in the event that they sort of snub their nose at the state and say, we don't care.
Okay, Representative Sanchez.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you guys for this presentation. Thank you, Representative. So I was just wondering, were there like any specific cases or examples that brought this about, or like what brought this legislation about in the first place?
I don't want to speak for you, but I want to be very deliberate in how I answer this. I don't have any, with respect, I don't have any intention of naming any names.
Yeah, no.
But I can tell you this is now my 7th session. It feels like the 30th session in this role. And over the years, we've seen this issue come up each election cycle, where, again, we suspect that the vendor is playing from out of state. We can't necessarily prove it, but where I'm from, 2 and 2 is still 4, you know. Yeah. But this is not like a one-off. This is something we've seen repeatedly.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Leverett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Jones, for bringing this bill. And thank you, Chairman Nani, for just sort of conceiving of it, because to me it seems essential that you have this evidence gathering capability to effectively do your job and prevent violations of the law. As you point out, they might happen here, but the evidence isn't always necessarily within the boundaries of the state. The question I have is more just a technical one about the use of I think that's the long-arm statute definition of non-resident that is added at the bottom of page 1, top of page 2. Just looking at that in the code, and this may be a question for Stuart, it refers to basically someone who is not domiciled in, not resident in, not, you know, organized in the state of Georgia at the time a claim or cause of action arises. Does that work within the framework of the statute to have that language, or do we just need to drop the text of the long-arm statute without the references to the claim in here?
If it's okay, I want to defer to Mr. Morelli. We discussed this at length in his office, and I felt as if Mr. Morelli's reasoning was sound, but I do not pretend to step in for leg counsel at all.
Well, I mean, I think the argument can be made. They have to, if they've moved back to Georgia, but at the time of the sort of the time frame of when the incident or the violation occurred, they were out of state. Well, then you don't really need extra jurisdictional authority because they're within the state anyway. But I'll let Mr. Morelli answer the question. It sounds like y'all have considered the issue and decided it is appropriate to just incorporate the definition in whole.
Stuart, go ahead.
Yeah, I think referencing the long-arm statute, you know, accomplishes the goal of, especially with foreign, you know, courts in other states, when they may be forced to look at this, you know, referencing our long-arm statute, which is fairly similar to most other states' long-arm statutes, is one of the reasons I went with referencing the long-arm statute. And I think to your point about the timing of what a non-resident is under the long-arm statute. I think that's further clarified, at least for this code section, when it talks about, a person who's a non-resident, who commits an act or omission. I think that would be the point in time that should be referenced in determining whether they are a resident or non-resident.
And if I can just follow up on that, so Stuart, so the fact that the statute we're incorporating talks about claim or cause of action arising expressly doesn't create a potential interpretation construction issue in your mind?
Not that I'm aware of. I would view this kind of as being a cause of action potentially under the that part of the long arm statute.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Stuart.
Okay, Representative Bazemore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this bill. Appreciate it. Very much needed. Quick question. This is just going to apply state to state and not out of the country where we see some actors playing?
Yeah, that's correct, because under federal law, it's already illegal for foreign dollars, foreign actors to, and I believe that there's a bill in the Senate on the FARA doctrine stuff incorporating, but my understanding is that's already sort of addressed by federal law.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no more questions on the part of the committee, I would entertain a motion. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Bill advances. Bring a copy to me at tomorrow or something, and we'll get it signed and in the rules. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Next bill that we will hear is House Bill 318. Representative Reeves, if you will go ahead and present as you are ready, sir. This bill was passed, came out of subcommittee due pass, so we're ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Governmental Affairs Committee. House Bill 318 is, if it's familiar, it's because you might have voted for it once or possibly twice last year. This is a zoning bill that Representative Roberts worked on a lot following a bill passed by the House in 2022 or so. It relates to Chairman Leverett's petition for review somewhat. He has been copied as we've gone through the process. We convened a group of about a dozen government as well as applicant zoning lawyers, Blue Ribbon Group, and got about 500 emails that have cleaned up this bill some more since last year. What this does is it clarifies the language for permits that are not zoning decisions. If it's not a rezoning or something that normally you have notice and hearing of, an administrative officer can approve those zonings. Examples are a food truck permit. That doesn't rezone the land. That's just given a permit for a particular short-term land use. A facade on a building, painting the facade, that's not a rezoning. Putting a porch on a house or a structure, that's not normally a zoning. So this clarifies that an administrative officer can handle those types of permits despite the change in the language a few years ago. It remedies some confusion that have slowed down permits and construction, and sent permits through the process of notice, hearing, and having people come out to the meetings and get alarmed unnecessarily. It also gives some clarity on appeals of zoning denials and zoning decisions so that you don't have a lot of litigation about the procedural way to appeal zonings. So that is the bill. We've nicknamed it the Efficient Zonings Bill, or the Easy Zonings Bill. So it's an improvement on recent changes in the law to respond to some confusion that has come about both on permits as well as rezoning appeals.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the presenter from the committee? Seeing none, we did have full hearing and subcommittee on this with public comment, so I would entertain a motion. We have a motion, second. Motion and a second. All in favor, or any comments? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Same
Thanks a lot.
instructions, bring me a form, we'll get it to rules. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, last bill on our agenda today is going to be Chairman Thomas's bill, House Bill 387. This is actually the first hearing of this bill, so we will allow public comment if anybody is in the audience who would like to do that. We did not have a sign-up sheet, so once Chairman Thomas makes his presentation, the committee has a chance to question the presenter. Then we'll just go by a show of hands of anyone who would like to comment on the bill. So with that, Chairman Thomas, go ahead and proceed as you're ready.
Sorry, I just walked in from Judy non-civil, so give me just a second. I'm getting everything pulled up. Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you very much. I'm here to present HB 387, LC number 47. Working off my phone here, and it always does this to me. LC 473356A. And this is an idea. Then this is a hearing only today, so it's really just the beginning of a conversation. 5 years, I guess it was about 5 years ago, me and a couple members of this committee, Chairman Anderson, Chairman Leverett, myself, Mary Margaret Oliver, Representative Oliver, and Representative Taylor, we actually had a study committee on annexation and cityhood, and part of that is there's some areas of the city where annexation disputes, it's a real issue, and it's, my opinion, has led to some unplanned for growth. And it's caused a lot of court cases. There is an annexation dispute process. It's basically predicated off of this idea that, we've spent so much time focusing on the what I say is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, the General Assembly's try to pack 5 pounds of cure or 10 pounds of cure in a 5-pound sack. So I came up with, it was just a different idea, and I'm not going to say this was my idea, but it was an idea that Cherokee County, where I live, where I represent, it had a lot of these issues. The county government, the city of government, they were consistently going to court, fighting over annexation cases. Quite frankly, the only people that ever won in any of this was the developer. And so a lot of people, we had kind of some turnover in leadership in Cherokee, and they decided that instead of spending all this time fighting each other in court, they would create what they call a growth boundary agreement, which is an agreement between the city and the county that says, hey, we agree that this is the land use in this area that we can grow, this, one city can grow into. We agree on this annexation, or that you can annex anything you want in this area. There's a conversation agreement on the densities in those areas. And it helps. It's created this really neat, we've not had one annexation dispute since this happened 4 years ago. So I have a pilot program. It works. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's a lot of counties that don't have this problem. So I put an idea on a piece of paper, and that idea is to make this growth boundary agreement part of service delivery strategy, and I believe it's a good fit in service delivery strategy because one thing about service delivery strategy is it's about services for the next 10 years. So if you can know what the growth boundary is in an area, and it makes it better to plan for how the county and the city can deliver those services. And they're both here today, and I'm sure both of them would be happy to talk on behalf of this. And it does need some time to work through the process. So as most of you know, that sometimes you just got to get a conversation going, and this is the beginning of my conversation. I think we've gone a long way with annexation dispute, the resolution process. Chairman Anderson, I know that you've probably lived it. Fortunately, after the study committee was over, I kind of slowly walked away, but you've been still walking the walk and talking the talk for annexation dispute ever since. And I know you've made leaps and bounds, and I'm very appreciative of all of the work that you've put in. This isn't no means to say that is, it's just a new idea to bring to the table. Again, because if we can motivate city governments and county governments to work together up front, everybody benefits. what's really neat is we've gotten to a point now, and later on I do hope to bring my city and county governments in to testify on behalf of how well this has worked, where not only can we plan for the regular growth that we're going to have, but we can also plan for affordable housing for people because again, I know a lot of you in this committee have heard me talk about middle-class wealth. Middle-class wealth was built off home ownership. And we gotta have to figure out ways to be able to get people in houses because they're never going to build generational wealth solely off the idea of a paycheck. It's just not going to happen. And I'm a believer that I have a responsibility in my seat to do everything that I can to make sure that people can have the American dream, whatever piece of the American dream that is. And I'll tell you one other anecdotal story, and I'll kind of turn this over. But I owned a house, and I bought it for my mother, and that was 4 years ago in 2020. It's public record, so I don't mind telling you. I paid $250,000 for the house. That same house is now on the market, $415,000. Do you know how many offers I've gotten on that house from investors? Cash offer, above asking, no inspection, 14-day close. Multiple offers. And we, and my wife and I, want to see that home go to a family. We want to see them. So that's our decision. But it's hard. It's hard for someone, and we're not desperate to get rid of the house. But it's hard for people when they're up against that to get into the American dream, to have that. And you know how many families I had come offer, hey, we here, but of course, I have to have an inspection. I have a bank that I have to deal with. I've got an appraisal, and we're willing to deal with that. And I don't mean to shoot off on that, but doing this, I believe, does allow for cities and county governments to grow in a controlled way. And I'm going to say one other thing real quick. If you don't live in a city, you have no say in what they do. You can go to the hearing, but you don't vote for any of the people that are in that city limit. And I've been in that case. I've had a piece of property annexed right next to me that had 100 more houses put on it than what people feel like should have been there. This gives the people that don't live in the city a say because it's, again, negotiated through service delivery strategy. So it's an idea on a piece of paper. It has details that needs to be worked out. I can tell you this is far from where we need to be, but it is a beginning. And with that, I'd be more than happy to take questions, kind of what we did and how we got to where we are.
All right, thank you, Chairman. And as I understand it, your intent really this to be a hearing only on the concept here, or are you?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
My plan is to, again, start putting this out, work with GMA, work with ACCG to see if we can really flush this idea out. But you have to start the idea. Sometimes, as most of you know, it takes multiple years to get a piece of legislation across the line, and so I'm trying to get that started today. I hope to return for a couple more rounds, so we can get this moving now.
We do have a few questions. If we can get started on that, Representative Adesanya.
Thank you, Chairman Anderson, and thank you, Chairman Thomas, and for the example that you gave to using yourself. Just a basic question: are you all when cities expand, are cities bringing the lawsuits to the county? Are they the ones suing the counties? The cities?
So the way the process works is, and we have three experts in this room. I consider Chairman Anderson to be one of them. But the way it works is if a city annexes into an area, the county has an opportunity to object to that annexation. They can go into a dispute resolution process where there's quite a few people that are brought into that fold, and sometimes it works. Sometimes, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you what. I'm going to defer to ACCG and GMA to tell you the exact details of how that works. But that's how it's called a dispute resolution process.
And thank you. And the reason I asked too, I mean, my home county, we have something similar to that. Folk from Mapleton who didn't want to be in a part of the new city, and they have a lot of pushback on that. So and they're not so happy that their address originally at some point says Smyrna, and now they're in the city of Mapleton. So yeah, that's what's sparked that.
Okay, thank you. And next, Representative Bazemore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this to our attention. And I don't know if you're aware, but I went through this several years ago with a city that everybody knows. However, is this just city to county? Because right now, Fulton County does not have any jurisdiction over the city. Everything is a city. We were unincorporated. We were the last portion of unincorporated. So what has happened also that gave people, some individuals here, my colleagues, heartburn, was that once we became a city, we had islands. We have a lot of little islands, so we have to work through that with the surrounding cities to try to come together to fix that, to make it more cohesive.
So part of this bill, at least the way, because there are going to be situations where this just doesn't make sense, okay? And I'm not, so I think in rural Georgia, I think there's probably some counties in rural Georgia that would be more than happy to have a whole city do nothing but annex the whole county. So, so I wrote a double opt-out provision. This is kind of my way of saying, if the county and the city during SDS, the way that I've got it written right now, if they say, look, we're not interested in this. This isn't something that we need to deal with. They can both agree that they don't need to enter into this process, but both parties have to agree. Otherwise, it pretty much doesn't do anything at all. This is one of and you talk about, well, the cities. The thing is about SDS, and this is something that I think the GMA will probably come up and talk about a little bit, is when you're entering in the cities with the county, this is probably a double-edged sword because all the cities have to agree in this, but they also have to agree. And I always think of, I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was Gwinnett County had 3 cities looking at annexing the same parcel of land. And listen, I get developers that they do what they do, but they shopped every city, they shopped all of them. And I think this would probably take care of a lot of that because the cities would have to agree. Obviously, you can't have both cities annex the same area. So I think that'll flush a lot of that out too, and especially in districts like ours that are, a lot more densely populated districts where you start seeing these city lines really kind of running up against one another. So I think that's a great question. I think it's something that I think in a way this will at least help address it on the SDS front. But again, we're exploring an idea right now, and I'd be happy for the input.
I appreciate it, and I would be more than happy to help with this.
Thank you.
Representative Bernal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing this. I was on that committee, the one that you just talked about, when we learned about annexation.
Well, you have to excuse me.
Thank you. But my question is, I have 2 questions. One, how many cities do you currently have in your county?
Let's see. There's Woodstock, Canton, Holly Springs, Waleska, and Ball Ground, so 5.
Okay. Do you have a large area that is unincorporated?
Yeah, we have still have quite a bit of unincorporated area left in Cherokee County.
So this would really suit better for those areas where they have land that can become another city?
And yeah, absolutely. I think this in certain areas, this is going to be a lot more applicable than other areas. So I think you're spot on that. I mean, there's going to be some places that, like I said, this just doesn't make sense. And that's why why we're thinking through this. We're putting in provisions to allow places where it doesn't make sense to just opt out of the process. But I can tell you the places that do need this, it's been really neat to watch. I'm not trying to air out any dirty laundry here, but our local governments didn't necessarily get along very well. But after this process was over, it's interesting to watch. I'm going to go ahead and name the city of Woodstock and Cherokee County, where they were so at odds with each other, and now all of a sudden they're talking about, hey, let's do some road planning on this particular road. We know that you're going to come out this way, and think about it. Like that's what all I care about is quality of life, And especially when you're in the metro areas, and it doesn't matter, not necessarily Metro Atlanta, but any metro area. It's a quality of life issue. And what's neat about this is once you can get through that kind of painful process of negotiating out what this looks like, what the densities and what the boundaries look like, then all of a sudden you're planning together. And the best way to get government or any organization or people in general is to put them towards a common goal. And now that all of a sudden they're planning for a common goal together, it was so refreshing to walk in and hear the city of Woodstock say, you know what, this is something that's important to us too. We need this road as well. We don't mind helping do some of the planning, and that would have never happened 10 years ago. So it's just it's been a refreshing idea. I wanted to present it to the committee and just see if this is something that makes sense. More of a statewide, or maybe not necessarily the whole state, but in certain areas where it actually does make sense.
Okay, I thank you for this. I live in unincorporated. I don't want to live in a city, so I'm okay with that.
Me too.
I have an issue, though, because we have granted several cities, the ones in Cobb, I think only one of them went through. I have a problem when we decide to allow those cities to annex, because some of the reasons that they give, like one gave, they wanted to have a park. Well, you can have a park. You don't have to annex to have a park. But I do think that we have to be conscious of what the rest of the citizens, because a lot of them aren't aware until after it happens of all that they don't have. And I just think doing a slower process like you're doing is excellent. I also want to thank you for not selling your house to those investors.
Yeah, I don't like to, you don't like to tell stories like that, but it's such a real world case of something that's happening today. And I think about our kids, I think about our grandkids, and if we can't allow them access to be able to get into a home and acquire wealth through asset, again, middle class's largest assets are home. And if we can't think of some ways to tackle this problem, we're going to have a generation that is perpetual renters that are going to be significantly less well off than we are. Sometimes, as Chairman Anderson, I even told you, if there's one thing that keeps me up at night, this is the only issue that truly keeps me up at night. And I know more about AI than anybody, I can tell y'all. So, but thank you for the question, and I apologize on the oversight. So, yeah.
Thank you. Representative Sanchez.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this bill, Chairman. Just a very quick question. Those growth boundary agreements, those are binding agreements, correct?
Yeah, they're well, currently the ones that are in place are non-binding.
Okay.
But part of this I would like to see it be a binding agreement. Otherwise, it makes everybody feel good, but until it doesn't, until it makes sense not to do it anymore.
And it lasts for 10 years, is that my understanding?
Yeah, typically, again, I have some experts in here that better talk about this, but it's a 10-year, but a lot of times you can revisit that during that period. And I would be completely open if the county and the city decide, hey, this doesn't make sense, we want to make some adjustments, there's nothing wrong with giving local government the flexibility. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all the committee questions at this time. Do we have anyone in the audience who would like to speak to the bill? All right, I have Mr. Jim Thornton with GMA and Mr. Todd Edwards with ACCG. You guys want to take turns or?
Take turns. We can take turns.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll start and then Todd will correct me.
Absolutely.
If
you will, just for the recording purposes, just introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Thank you, Jim Thornton with GMA. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee for hearing this bill. Thank you, Chairman Thomas, for bringing this issue forward. It is something that we certainly think does warrant conversation and discussion. There are a lot of details to work through. The chairman alluded to that. Many of your questions got to that very point. I can say that this has obviously worked very well in Cherokee County and for the cities in Cherokee County. I've actually spoken to the mayor of Woodstock. I've spoken to the city manager of Canton, and certainly have heard good things about this process in Cherokee County. Appreciate Chairman Thomas having shared this legislation with us. prior to introducing it. He and I have had a couple of meetings in his office since, hearing more details about the Cherokee County experience. And I think that's something that we need to talk about, and we need to think through and learn from. But to your questions, Fulton County is a totally municipalized county, is a very different scenario. I can tell you that some of y'all know, I was mayor in LaGrange for 8 years, on the council before that. We probably had 24, 15 or 20 at least, annexations. Never one was in dispute, because in our county was one where they were fine with any annexations. It meant they didn't have to provide services to the area that was annexed. So every situation across the state is going to be a little bit unique. And so what we want to do is work with Chairman Thomas, work with ACCG, to see how we can sculpt some of the provisions of this that will make sense in those places where it is appropriate, and then see how it can be an option in other communities. I do think it's worth stating, many of you were on this committee last session, and you may recall HB 1407 that Chairman LaHood brought last year to redo the service delivery strategy agreement. Service delivery strategy is all about reducing conflict. The goal is for cities and counties to get along. And that probably works in 150 of our 159 counties. And then there's 9 or so where there are conflicts and they became litigious and so forth. We worked very carefully with ACCG on that bill, HB 1407. We addressed some of the issues y'all have talked about. 10-year agreement. What triggers a renegotiation in that 10-year cycle? What are the triggering events? Who has to be at the table for some of those? SDS is a complicated statute. It was put into place in 1998. It was amended in 2004 to exclude constitutional officers, because originally, in its original iteration, constitutional officers were included. That amendment was done in 2004, and the statute was not touched for 20 years. And so Chairman LaHood's bill last year, after a study committee that he and Senator Ginn co-chaired, had 5 hearings, after working with ACCG and GMA, we were able to make what we think were some improvements to the SDS process. There's a little bit of cleanup we're going to have to do that Chairman LaHood is working on, but very technical issues. But we think that was a vast improvement to the SDS process. Our concern with the growth boundary agreement is dropping a new element into SDS that we haven't fully vetted, and so that's why we are so grateful that Chairman Thomas has brought this bill forward and is working with us, and we look forward to having some detailed conversations, bringing some of our Cherokee County mayors and commissioners to the table, as well as bringing some other elected officials from across the state to work out some of these details. There's just a lot of education to do. Before we take this and make this applicable to the other 158 counties across the state that have not. So we're grateful for the deliberative consideration, and I think that we have to remember that this is intended to bring down conflict. And so it's worked in Cherokee, and if we do and put this into the SDS framework, replicate this in other counties, either under some sort of formula applicability or statewide applicability or with an opt-out. However we work through that detail, we want to make sure that it doesn't become another point of conflict, but that it becomes something that actually accomplishes exactly what has happened in Cherokee. I would also mention that there is a parallel process in law, which is the comprehensive land use planning process. And the comprehensive land use planning process requires a 5-year update to the planning process. That also can be a triggering event for a service delivery renegotiation. And so we just want to make sure that we think carefully through this. I'll tell you, I shared this with Chairman Thomas. Literally, when we were working on 1407, we had ACCG staff, legal team, GMA staff and legal team, representatives from DCA, who has the burden of administering SDS, as well as annexation, as well as land use planning, and we literally wrote out a decision tree, right? I mean, we got a chalkboard out, a whiteboard, and did a decision tree, if this, if that, and so forth. And we just want to run all those traps. Before we introduce a new concept into the process, we want to run all those traps. So thank y'all for your consideration, and look forward to working with the committee as well as with the chairman in further conversation. I think this is definitely an idea that we need to have some conversation, discussion about. And on behalf of GMA, I pledge all of our cities to work in good faith with y'all to try and see if this is something we can include in future service delivery discussions. And I'll be glad to answer questions, but I know Todd Edwards would also like to speak to them.
Okay. No questions at this time, Mr. Edwards?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Todd Edwards with the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia, and I'll be much briefer than my distinguished colleague, city colleague Jim here, who does a great job and hard to follow. So a little bit of background. Representative Thomas knows of which he speaks. I've been here since 2004. 2007 was the year of the great annexation, the first law on annexation arbitration process. And even back then, ground zero was Cherokee County and the cities from there. That started it all, got us to where we're currently at. I know Senator Representative Anderson revised the law a few years ago, another legislation this year. So it's an ongoing, can be conflict between cities and counties. It's usually in fast-growing areas and areas where the counties provide city-like services, where there's a lot of development, and it's, let's be honest, it's usually led the conflict anyway from the developers, kind of, for lack of a better word, density shopping between cities and counties. One of the biggest attributes to this, where it can be agreed upon, and it's not for everyone in these areas, is that it might lessen some of that conflict. We appreciate Representative for bringing this bill, the author bringing it forward today. Begins the conversation. Service delivery, it's been well explained. Annexation, the rub between the two, anything that can cut down on lawsuits, bring cooperation in the process is certainly appreciated. Could be a better way to plan for growth. Could be a better way to plan for infrastructure. And all that gets back to service delivery strategy. I had more to say. I think it's already been covered. A couple of questions that were asked earlier regarding Mableton and South Fulton, those are somewhat different issues. Annexation is primarily, the legislature can do that, but primarily it's a city-driven decision, conflict. The county may object. That's the process. Where you asked earlier, I believe if there are lawsuits, it's an objection process that goes through panels. New cities are largely a legislative process, or are a legislative process. They do have some of the same problems, but they're usually formulated, these cities, for different reasons than what we see with annexation. Fulton, fully municipalized, no annexation, so it wouldn't happen within the boundaries of Fulton itself, but the surrounding counties that are not quite to that point, certainly it could be of use. But, without much further ado, I will say that this is great thinking. It's not going to be for everyone. I'm glad it's a hearing. I'm glad we're having this discussion. We, like GMA, look forward to working with the author, you all, anything we can do at achieving the ultimate goal, which is reducing conflict, having cities and counties get along better in this process, and we appreciate that.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, before
Yes.
we wrap up, on the annexation dispute process, that doesn't preclude county governments, if they feel that the process didn't meet the law, from filing a lawsuit, because that did happen in the case of the city of Woodstock and Cherokee County, where it was believed that the annexation actually wasn't legal due to contiguity to the city. So there was a whole lawsuit over that. So it doesn't mean that there's not lawsuits. Just to clarify, but for the most part, it's handled through the arbitration process. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
And thank you for hearing my bill, Mr. Chairman.
And just before we wrap up, anyone else, this is a first hearing, it is hearing only, and there will be further discussion in the future on this, but is there anyone else who'd like to speak to the bill? All right, seeing none, thank you, and that's the last item we have on the agenda.